Hello, my name is Aaron Schuerr. I'm from Livingston, Montana, and I am excited to share with you a winter landscape. Being in Livingston, Montana, winter is the longest season. It's a season that most artists hide out in their studio, and for me, it's when I love to get out and paint. What I want to take you through is the process of going from a plein air painting that didn't quite work out to a pastel painting that hopefully will work out. Taking the elements from that experience that at the time was a little bit disappointing and taking those elements and bringing them to a different medium where I felt like they will work out better. It's going to be a journey from the mountains in Montana to this studio here, and I'm excited that you're along for it. All right, before I get my fingers dusty, let's talk about the materials. And when I talk about materials, I want you to know that I am not naturally an organized person. And I say that because I know there are some of you out there that struggle with keeping track of your pastels, finding a way to organize them that works well. It's taken me a long time. I've had to really train myself to have an order, to have a system that works for me. Now, I'm going to share with you my system that's not the right system. Okay, it's not the right way to organize your pastels. You're going to have to find your own way. And that's both with the colors that you choose, according to both your personality and the subjects that you like to paint, but also the way that works best for your temperament, your brain, the way that you want to work, your goals as an artist. So let's go over how I organize my pastels. I have a few different setups. This is one that I use in the field and sometimes in the studio. So I'm going to start here with, this is a Dakota pastel storage box. They make them in a few different sizes. They're really nice, really sturdy, great for traveling. I have no problems, when I'm flying with pastels getting jarred around too much. Notice that I've got them organized roughly here where I have my grays, or I call them neutrals. And we'll talk more about that as we go, down dark to light. And then we're moving into warmer, reddish tone neutrals, and to your reds. You notice with landscape, I don't have a whole lot of red in there. There's just not a lot of red that I see in the landscape. Moving towards your oranges, into your lighter greens, down into the darker greens. You see I have a lot more greens in my setup. Now, if I'm working in the field or working towards, say, a winter landscape, I might have less of these greens, but this is my general setup. Now you can see I'm going from a little bit warmer green tones to cooler, and then into the blues. And in blues, I think of your turquoise blues, into your blue, and then into blue-violet. So I think in terms of value, dark to light, and then I want warms and cools. So you have the warms, the greens here, and then as you get in here, you have cooler greens. So I want to think in terms of temperature as well. So that's a good basic setup for both the field and the studio. You can expand that in the studio. In the studio I have a table that has these kinds of dividers, but they're bigger, so I can have more colors. With pastel, I feel like more is more. You can never have enough. Now, moving to this set, this is a set that I made with Jack Richardson and Company. The way that I made this set is for a couple of months, I did lots of little studies of every kind of landscape I could think of, from Maui seascapes to winter landscapes from Montana, and came up with a set that, with the colors that I found that I was using most consistently through all of the different landscapes. So I'm going to be using some of that. This last box here is, I did a smaller study of the same subject, and I dropped some of the colors into this box that I used for that. So these are colors that I think I might be using that weren't in this box here. So hopefully between all of those, we'll have enough for the painting. Now, one word on color that I want you to think about before we even begin, and that is color relativity. We're going to come back to this idea again and again. And what I mean by that is when I start working on a pastel, especially when I'm working in the field, I often start off with this feeling of like, oh no, this time I don't have it. I don't have that subtle color of that distant mountain or the right green of the grass. I don't quite have the color. And I often will feel like, oh no, I'm in trouble this time. I can't finish this. As I go, I make a color commitment. I say, okay, this is the closest color I have. I'm going to put it down and see what happens. And so I might say, okay, this is a little too dark, a little too light, a little too blue, a little too something. And so what can I do with another color to get closer to what I want? And in doing that, you'll make these wonderful discoveries, even with a limited palette. So I say use as many colors as you can in your palette, but sometimes that's not possible. And you can make wonderful discoveries about how color functions in concert with each other to create a rich palette, a rich painting that might not exactly match the landscape, but works in harmony. So it has been a tradition for the last few years that every New Year's Day, I go for a cross-country ski outing with my wife, my brother-in-law, and sister-in-law. We go to a place called Highlight Canyon. It's one of the few places outside of Bozeman, Montana that are accessible. The road leads you high up into the mountains. And there's a spot on this ski trail that has always made me stop. I think I've taken photos every time I've skied past it. It's a little bit of creek that eventually flows into Highlight Creek. And it's just this intimate little wonderful creek. And I had photographed it, done a little painting of it, and we came back the next New Year's, same thing, stopped back, and I was amazed at how different it was a year later. And I thought, you know what, this time I want to actually go through the trouble of hauling my gear up here and painting it. It'll be worth it. So about a week later, I came back up to Highlight, drove all the way up into the mountains and trudged through the deep snow to this spot. At the end of the day, did a little 10 by 8, quick little painting just to see if it would be an idea that had legs. And I thought, wow, I love the little curve of the creek here, and then the reflections really resonated. I came back up to Highlight with this time a big canvas, 24 by 18, which in winter is a large size. For me, that means a multi-day painting. And I thought, this is going to be a killer painting. This is going to be the one. But it didn't quite work out that way. So let me go through a couple of the pictures here. And let me go through, and in doing so, I'm going to go through a process of analyzing a painting, picking out the things that work, the things that don't, eliminating the things that don't work, and how I came up with the composition that I'm going to do today. So this first one here that we see, again, is the little 10 by 8 quick little painting that I started with. So then I went back into the studio, did some sketching, and I thought I had a good plan, came back up with the 24 by 18 painting. And I worked on that for 3 sessions in the cold with all of my snowsuit on and many, many layers. And at the time I thought, wow, this is really going well. This is the one. But then when I got back to the studio, I noticed some problems here. And I want to share them with you. If you notice in the picture, there is a spot here in the top left. That's where the sunlight is coming through. I like the paint quality. I like the little bits of red where it's diffusing and breaking up the contours of the trees. But it's way up in the left corner. So it's all of this beautiful work almost off of the painting. And I thought, wow, what am I going to do with that? I kept thinking, oh, I should be able to save this. And I kept, reworking it. But there's just no way I could do that. So now let's look at the second one. This is of the whole painting. There's two other things that I felt like were really problematic. One is in the right side here, there's this one tree right at the edge that's being really illuminated, and it's warmer because the sunlight's hitting it. Now that tree, it's right at the edge of the painting, and it's a good bit of painting in the wrong spot. The third problem I see here is with these red twiggy willows that you get. And I love the red willows in winter because it often gives you a shot of color and warmth that you don't get anywhere else. But there's so much going on, they're so busy that they don't really have any shape. It's all twig and no shape. And so I felt like that was a problem. And then the final little bit here that didn't quite work from the study is because the sunlight is off to the left in the top corner, you see the reflections in the water are all very dark. And in that original study, there was a little bit more contrast in the water. So I felt really disappointed. I put the painting away, left it, I don't know, for maybe a month or more. And then I took it back out and took another look, and I thought, I think I've got some ideas here. In analyzing the places that the painting, the composition didn't work, I think I can make something happen here. And I thought, what if I move the sunlight to the other side of the tree, more central to the picture? What if I move this foreground tree a little bit over? What if I eliminate that bright tree that was off to the right? And if I have that sunlight a little bit more central, I can get more reflections, and I can move it down so it's a little bit later in the day. And in doing so, I might be able to come up with something. I also decided I wanted to switch mediums. So for the study, I thought, let's try this with pastel. It just feels like that might be the medium that will be better to tell the story that I want to tell of my experience in that place. I'm going to carry you through my changes when I block this in, and we'll see if we can make that closer to the reality, to the truth of the experience that I had up in the high mountains. All right, now that you've heard the story of the painting and the troubles I went through to get there, let's get into the process of moving from what happened in the field to what's going to now happen in the studio. There's a step that I often will take between study and final pastel that I want to share with you briefly here. This is a whole nother lesson, but I think it's worth introducing. This is a very, very quick sketch. This is probably maybe a 20-25 minute sketch. You can see it's very rough, very unfinished. I'm working in vine charcoal on this one. And the way that I work with vine charcoal is that I lay in the darks, and then I use an eraser to pull out the lights. All I wanted to get here on this one is to really nail the composition that I'm going for. Because I found that when I did one of the little studies, I tended to make the trees bigger than I wanted, and it started to feel crowded. So I thought, all right, I need to really get in my mind that space and the rhythm of these trees up here. So I did a quick little charcoal sketch just before I left. And that stage going from study to a studio painting, I will often do charcoal drawings to really get the composition. One, to eliminate the color so I can just see it in black and white. It helps me to see if the composition works. And two, I call it my what if stage. So I can say, well, what if I make that tree smaller? What if I make that tree bigger? What if I do a little bit more of the creek? What if I change the horizon? I can play around in charcoal almost consequence-free. It's very easy to just take a rag, wipe a section of it down, rework it. So I can play around with compositional ideas in a short amount of time and find the composition that I'm really excited about before I make that step to the studio piece. Now, as you know, when you're doing a more substantial painting, and it starts to go astray, especially in pastel, it's really hard to make changes. Especially if you've got a dark and you decide, oh, I want to make that tree smaller and add more sky behind it. You've got to brush that pastel off, and pretty soon you can get really lost. You can get stuck in the weeds on that one. So I feel like this is a step that's worth taking. It takes a little bit more time, and sometimes I'm anxious to get started. I want to get the color out. But I feel like I always save time in the long run by doing these studies, whether it's a quick one like this, or sometimes I get really excited about the charcoal and I'll do a very finished drawing, even if I don't need to, just because I'm really get involved and excited about the process. So here's what I'm going to do, and here's how I'm going to save a little bit of time between here and the pastel. I'm going to do a transfer with tracing paper, and I'll show you I've already started it. And then I'm going to actually make a little transfer onto my pastel paper. So that way I don't have to sit there and try to copy this. I can just literally transfer it. So let me show you how I do that. I'm sure you can buy transfer paper, but I just use tracing paper for this. You can see here, this is a rough, quick tracing of the sketch. So here's the important part. I flip this over, and then I take pastel, and I just trace over the drawing. Now, I know that things are going to just change and evolve as I work, but this gets me a good starting point. And then I like having the charcoal, when I'm working in the studio, I often have, 1 or 2 studies, sometimes 3. And I'll have the charcoal drawing. I'll have those all up somewhere that I can see them. So that way, when I'm working, sometimes I get excited about an area and I keep working it and I start losing that initial idea, the initial overall composition. I might start just naturally making the trees bigger or change the shape of the creek. And that charcoal will give me a reminder. Oh, wait, no, I want to go here with this composition. So it kind of serves as a bit of a reset. So almost there. Oops. Pressing a little too hard there. Broke my pastel. Okay, that's it. So now, what I'm going to do, got my paper here. Just going to lay it on top here. And I often will take something like a clip and to rub that in, but I'm just going to use my fingers here. And hopefully that'll work. So you see here, I'm saving a little time because I'm going to finish this and I'll have a rough block in, okay? And now we are ready to go. A little bit of word on the paper here. I'll put this up here while I talk about that. I'm using Pastel Matte. And it's a gray. I wanted a darkish color because this is a high contrast painting. You're going to have strong light coming through, strong light and dark patterns in this one. So I felt like a little bit darker paper would work well with this. I wouldn't use this color of a paper or a darker paper if it was a, say a midday scene or a more open, anywhere between sunrise and sunset. Sunrise and sunset, a darker paper is great. But at any other time of day, I'm going to use a lighter paper. So I chose the color of the paper very specifically for this subject. If you haven't worked with pastel matte, it's worth experimenting with. It's different than sanded paper. So your sanded paper, it's literally a sandpaper. You can, if I rub my hand on it, eventually I'm going to wear off the skin. It's very, very rough. This is smooth to the touch, but it still layers up in a similar way to a sanded paper. What I really like about it for working in plein air especially is that it doesn't go through the pastel as fast because it's not rough like a sanded paper. The downside for some of you that maybe aren't used to it is it's much more permanent than a sanded paper. And if you like to blend, you really can't do any blending until you've layered up quite a bit of pastel. It just takes the mark and holds it there. So, all right. Now we finally have the basic composition. I've got an idea, and I think it's time to get started. Okay, let's get started. Let's get some color on the paper. Now, I want to think in terms of the large shapes, the big patterns, average color, average value, average temperature of the whole thing when I start. Start broadly, work towards the particular. So in other words, I got to bake the cake before I put the frosting on, okay? So if I get caught up in detail right away, I'm going to get lost for me. So what's a good place for me to start here? I'm going to start with the big darks. I'm starting with a fairly, you notice here, this is not just a green. This is more of a reddish green here. This is one of Diane Townsend's tirages. It's good for coloring a lot. So there's a principle here that I think about when I'm starting this. It's called linked dark shapes. And what that simply means is that when I'm looking at a landscape, I'm not thinking in terms of 50 different trees. I'm thinking in terms of just a shape. This tree here links into this foreground tree. And again, by thinking in terms of averages, I can make adjustments in color and value and temperature as I go. But these are all going to be little shifts in terms of color and the amount of detail from foreground to background. So I'm just going to get that covered. Thinking about how far down I want that, how much snowy area that I want in proportion to the trees. So I don't want exactly the same here to the creek. I want a variety there. And I'm going to be flipping back and forth here between the previous painting that I've done of this subject and my photo references. One of the questions I'm going to have to answer here as I go is, as the sun is dropping down beneath the trees, the closer it gets to the horizon, the more sunset it gets, so the warmer it gets. So do I want to have the light really blasting through where it's not going to be quite sunset, but it'll be really exciting, or do I want to move it towards a sunset light? So I don't know exactly the answer to that one. I'm going to see where the painting leads me. Can't have everything worked out all at once. Got to leave a little bit of room for discovery. I think a good painting is, that the process to me is, it's this balance between planning and improvisation. Leaving room for discovery. I don't want to get too heavy with the pastel because I'm going to be coming back in. There's these little pillows of snow that are resting on the branches. So set that there. I'm going to grab a paper towel. So you see my fingers here? They're really dark, covered in dark pastel. So I'm going to be moving towards the blues and the snow. So I want to make sure my hands are clean when I do that. One of the benefits to starting simply and looking at big, broad shapes like this is that I'll be able to see clearly the composition as I go. Now I want to move. I was just thinking about something. The light's going to be coming through here. And I've got this tree a little bit too lined up with that. I want that a little off. So light through here, and then this tree is going to be important because it's going to be the link between the foreground creek and the background. And while I'm at it, let's start to introduce a little color into the creek. So I'm going to start, already you'll see my hand kind of go back and forth. I'm just telling myself, all right, so this tree is going to come through. You're only going to see a little bit of this one. And then this one you're going to see a lot. So you can see that, I end up losing a decent amount of my initial drawing, but I can check back to that charcoal sketch if need be. Okay. Really basic averages. So the blue of the snow. One of the wonderful things about painting in winter, snow is just a beautiful medium. It simplifies the forms. So you really see the sculptural shape of the forms, the way that the land here curves down, pillows, and the snow pillows over that. So I love winter in terms of the abstract qualities. I'm going to move this up so I can get the bottom. We'll see if this will stay. One of the challenges of using a different easel here. I'll try this out and see if it will, if I can get enough pressure there so that I can work all the way to the bottom. I'm going to use a light touch here because I know I'm going to be adding some of the light, especially in here. This is the part where I feel like, whoa, this is pretty rough, but I can still remember what I'm going for with the composition. So I'm not going to get too far on the shape and the reflections on the creek until I get a little further on nailing these shapes, because these are just reflections. So what do we want to use for that ridge? Now, go a little bit darker, I think. I'll try this one. So there's a ridge poking through distant hills. When I originally did the oil, it was a much steeper one because there's actually some big mountains back there. It's a place that I love to go backcountry skiing. There's some incredible country back there. But I found that even though I wanted to hint at those big peaks that I enjoy skiing in, getting turns, it didn't really, this is a gentle, intimate scene. So here's an important thing to think about too when you're composing your paintings. What's the quality of this scene? So is this, this is a high mountain scene, but it's not, this isn't about the sublime. It's not about the grand vista, the huge view. This is a little surprise, Like I said, when we were skiing this, you come down a little hill around a corner. Oh, there's this little creek here. I got to stop. I got to take a picture. I got to come back with my easel, because it's a safe place. It's a place to stop and rest, to have lunch. It's sheltered. So I want to really develop that sense of intimacy, of quietness, versus maybe a scene where it's about the grandeur of the mountains. So in doing so, maybe I don't want to have really big peaks in the background, because that pushes against that idea of intimacy. So I'm going to go ahead here, and I'm going to start establishing where my light is going to go, because to me this is what it's about. So now going back to, if you remember the oil painting, that light was way up here in the corner. I don't know what I was thinking. So I'm moving it from here to this side, moving that tree over just a little bit so that this gives enough room here so that I can have some of that warmth, the reflections in the water. So a principle that I think about here is the truth of experience. So in this spot, no one's going to come and see my painting and say, oh, I've been there. That's not exactly what would happen. The sun goes, in January, the sun tracks here. No one knows that. So how did the place make me feel, and how can I speak to that in a painting? So that means sometimes uprooting and moving trees, changing the shape of a mountain, changing the shape of a creek, all of those things in order to be true to your experience. And then also, as I go, this composition will start taking on its own kind of reality. And so I want to respond both to the subject, to my reference material, but then I also want to respond to what's happening in the picture. Sometimes I get really surprised, that I'll have an idea in mind and I start working on the painting, and it's almost like every once in a while, sometimes the painting has its own idea. And I need to be open enough to let that idea come out and not always impose my will. Hi, I'm Aaron Schuerr, and welcome to my workshop. In this workshop, we will be exploring the winter landscape. I'm going to take you to a favorite little spot up in the mountains in Montana in January. We're going to be looking at the end of the day when the sunlight is streaming through the trees, the snow is going into shadow, and there's a dark creek coming out of the pines. And we're going to explore with that the relationship of cool, shadowy forms in the snow, and then the warm light streaming through the trees. So we're going to have that contrast of warm and cool, of light and shadow through a winter landscape. I'm drawing from references that I painted on location on cold days in January, so that I can bring not just the reality of the place, but the experience of the place. Because ultimately, art is about sharing our experiences and our stories. I mass in the big shapes. I work from dark to light. I layer up the color so that you get a luminescence that makes the painting interesting and dynamic. Here I'm going to show you how to link dark shapes, how to look at the big forms, look at the average colors of whole forms, and to start from very, very simple shapes that are interesting and move toward a resolved detail. Wherever you are in your journey as an artist, whether you are new to the medium or you are a seasoned veteran, pro, we are all on the same road. And I'm just sharing my experience. The best part about this is you don't have to suit up in your big snowsuit and mittens. You can stay in the warmth of your studio or in your living room, and I will take you on the trip. And on this trip, you will learn how to see the winter landscape with fresh eyes.
Welcome to Interviews with the Artist. I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazine. Our guest today is Aaron Schuerr. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we're really excited to learn more about you. You're one of the rare people who has kind of a multi-talented approach to things. You're a world-class pastel artist, but you're also a world-class oil painter. Any other mediums you work in?
On stage as an actor, but no, not any mediums. Not any. Well, charcoal drawings occasionally, preparatory drawings, but pastel and oils.
So tell me about this acting thing.
Oh, I just do a lot of theater in between travels in Bozeman and Livingston. In
So
Montana.
what kind of roles do you do?
Oh, the last one I played I played the monster in a production of Frankenstein.
Really?
Yeah, so got myself a little ugly.
So,
That's
well, you couldn't possibly be. But so when you do these, are they like, several weeks, summertime, summer stock, weekends? What does it look like?
It depends, and a lot of it, it's hard to. It's something I love. I really have a passion for, but it's hard to squeeze in with all the travel with art. So I've done everything from your traditional maybe 5-week run to some outdoor theater projects that I've been doing with the theater company, where we're kind of marrying the outdoor experience with sometimes Shakespeare or poetry, and sometimes I'm even doing with those outdoor theater projects. They'll have me set up and paint. So I've done a project. I did a project last summer at Tippett Rise Art Center in the foothills of the Beartooth Mountains, where I was painting, and then these tour groups would come up, and then I would put my brushes down and do Shakespeare monologues.
Really?
And then go back into painting. So that's that's marrying all the creative worlds that I inhabit.
Well, it's neat to know that about you. So which came first, chicken or egg, acting or painting?
The painting, for sure.
Yeah.
So, I started, boy, it's funny. There was a day that I decided I was going to become an artist. I was 8 years old, and there was a lady down the street. I still remember her name, Heather Berman. If you're ever out there, I don't know what happened, where she is now. Heather Berman was designing my elementary school mascot, the Eastview Wildcats. And I still don't know why she was at my parents' house, at my house. And I had never seen someone. She was doing a pencil drawing, she was doing sketches of different cats, and she had all these library books of cats. And I think she was doing a drawing of a lynx, and I'd never seen someone draw something representationally. And I was just mesmerized. And so I snuck away with one of the books and paper. I don't even think I asked her, because I was too embarrassed, and I snuck off, and I did a drawing of a mountain lion on a cliff. That's what I remember from one of the books. And I didn't know, I had no idea I could draw. I wasn't like a doodler or anything before that. And that moment, I was like, wow, this is...
So you just, no practice, you just drew it?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't anything amazing. It was, it just was, it looked like a mountain lion, and for an 8-year-old, it fulfilled just about everything I wanted. It was interesting to do, it passed the time, and it got me a little bit of attention. Yeah. Which is, it's still, I think it's still a little bit what it's about, right?
Well, you're an actor. Actors love attention. A lot of painters love attention.
Yeah, it's the duality of being an artist sometimes that makes me laugh is I feel like, I want everybody to leave me alone so I can, get my work done. Leave me alone. I just want to do my art. And then I think, wait, why isn't anybody noticing? Look, I did a painting.
Yeah. So are you the guy that likes to have people come up to you when you're outdoors painting and ask you questions or look at what you're doing?
It totally depends.
Yeah.
I definitely wouldn't seek that out. But I do find it fascinating, the kind of interactions, when out plein air painting, whether it's at home or abroad, the kind of interactions that I get with people. Sometimes you get people that are completely obnoxious, and they don't, mainly it's like they don't acknowledge you as a person. It's just something like, you're an attraction, a roadside attraction. That can get demeaning and frustrating. But then there's other people that are genuinely interested and intrigued and have questions. And if people come to it with an openness like that, I'm more than happy to share.
So what's the worst that's ever happened? You've been out there painting, you're a tourist attraction.
Man. So I'm going to back up a little bit and tell you a story that relates. So just take a second on this one. So I took 2 trips to Morocco about 10 years ago, painting trips. And the first part of the trip, we landed in Marrakesh, busy city. And, Marrakesh is just fascinating. And the one day I was in this square, this little plaza, and there were leather workers. And I was standing back in the corner. I didn't dare bring up my camera or anything like that because they're working. I want to give them some respect. But I was watching because it was fascinating to watch the process. One of the guys is loading up leather scraps onto a donkey cart, and he goes to leave. And there's a few other people around too, some other tourists, and I'm trying to stay as far back as I can. And he's leading the donkey, but he's walking backwards, and he's got his middle finger up as he's leaving. And I thought, what is going? Like, that's why? Why would you do that? And I realized he didn't want people taking his pictures. And there's tourists everywhere, and they're just taking pictures like you're a roadside attraction, like I said. And I realized like he was just keeping them from taking his picture. He did not want his picture taken, so he walked backwards with his donkey cart with his middle finger up. And for a moment, I was a little incensed by that because I was like, I wasn't even, I was being respectful as far as I was concerned. Well, fast forward to about a month later, I'm back home. I'm painting in the Tetons, and I was off in an aspen grove, off the road, not at a tourist spot, and this whole family comes out, walks across the meadow, and they start setting up like basically a full photo shoot with, and I'm trying to paint. At times they're blocking my easel, and they're getting in front, arranging the kids, and never once looked at me. I don't mind, like, if we don't speak the language, they never did the language charades that we do, like, is it okay if I take a picture, that kind of thing. He's just snapping pictures. And there was a certain point where the guy was down on his knees looking up at the easel, getting the right angle, still never acknowledged me as a human. And I thought about the donkey cart driver with the middle finger because I was so close to doing exactly what he did. I thought, no, I better not do that. But it was funny because I felt this sense of camaraderie with this Moroccan donkey cart driver who didn't want his picture taken. Sure. Because I was like, wow, that's, the people over there, they're dealing with that every day, trying to get their work done with the tourists and everything. So it gave me a little change in perspective that I thought was, for me was valuable.
So what are the things that you hear the most often when you're out painting and people do encounter you? Are there some patterns of things that people typically say?
Oh, I mean, the ones that just crack me up is, oh, that looks so relaxing, or that looks fun. And usually I'm in the middle of like a plein air event where, I got up in the dark, started painting before sunrise, and I'll be painting, maybe sometimes by headlamp, so you're in the middle of a 14-hour day, right, standing at your feet in the sun and totally exhausted, and someone comes up and they see what you're doing and like, oh, that looks fun. Is this a hobby? Like, I always just smile and I'm like, yeah.
So are you saying it's not fun?
It can be fun.
Yeah.
No, it's,
I mean, you love what you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, I think that any kind of real genuine, call it fun, or anything that's satisfying, we really have to work through some pain and frustration.
Playing football is also fun.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I mean, you got to practice.
I think that's a good, like sporting. I do, CrossFit, and it's like, oh, it's painful, and afterwards you're like, oh, that was great.
Yeah.
Painting can be a little bit like that, where, like I go through these recurring stages in the painting process, where you start, you're like, wow, this is going to be the greatest painting. I'm so excited to look at that view and, got this all worked out, and start blocking it in. And then it starts to feel like, wow, this is never going to come together. And then painting goes through, I call it the awkward adolescence, where you're like, wow, okay, this has got some problems. Is it going to grow up to be a mature adult, this painting? And then, if things are going all right, there's that magical moment where painting comes out the other side, and suddenly it starts to really coalesce and feel like something. And in the best moments, it carries the artist along a little bit, carries me along, and I get some surprises and learn some things. So, you know, and I don't care how good the painting is. Every painting I do, there's a slight sense of disappointment, and I don't say that in a bad way. It's that sense of like, you know, you have this thing in your mind's eye, like where you can go with this painting, what you're shooting for, and there's just only so far my skill can take me, and that's why I do another painting. And so the gift of painting to me is I get the process of growth and going through making a painting, and then I feel like it's for the viewer to finish that, to enter in and see that painting, and for them it's a complete idea.
Well, you know, I think the joy of painting, I was just writing about this today, as a matter of fact, and that is that, you know, you strive to get to a certain level, no matter what level you are, you know,
Right.
whether you're a complete beginner, you strive to get to a certain level, and you toil and you work hard to get to the top of that mountain.
Right.
And when you get to the top of the mountain and you look up, there's another mountain range.
Exactly.
You know, and so
That's a good way of putting it.
people never, even people that you and I both know who are the top of the top masters, they never feel like they've ever completely accomplished all that they can do.
No, and that's you know, at times that's the frustration, but it's also the joy of it.
Yeah.
You know, that there's more to learn, more ways to grow. When I'm teaching workshops, I will, you know, I give students the bad news up front, and usually, you know, I'll tell them some form of, you're not here to make it easier. The dirty little secret here is it doesn't get easier. In some ways, it gets harder, because your visual acuity and your conceptual framework grows as you learn. And so you're going to be able to push yourself a little harder, a little further. But that, you know, I think sometimes when people are learning, they think, oh, if I can master the skills, it will feel easier.
Yeah.
If you master skills, it just means that you can make a more profound statement, maybe.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make it easier.
Do you find when you're teaching workshops that you have a certain number of people who are there to learn, who are actually willing to experiment and try the things that you're teaching, and then you have others who are just there to be there, but they're not actually going through the effort? Do you ever experience that?
I want to be careful with what I say, because I want people to sign up for workshops, so I don't want to say anything bad about them. No, I'm joking. Yeah, no, that's a good question. When I'm teaching, yeah, I get people from all backgrounds. You know, I get some people that are very eager and are willing to take risks and to try different things, and some people that my first job as a teacher is to get them over some of their anxieties and fears. You know, and I'll talk about that when I'm teaching workshops, that, you know, like taking a workshop painting for 3 days, trying to learn this stuff, it can be a very tiring experience. And it can sometimes even be an emotionally draining experience for people. I'll address that because to me, what I have to offer for them is not, you know, I don't offer recipes to painting. I try to offer an approach to seeing the world, an approach to building a composition. And I encourage students to take risks. To quote Neil Gaiman, make glorious mistakes.
Why?
Why? Because that's the only way you're going to grow.
Why? Why
And I
is that?
think that, you know, like, and I'm speaking from experience of taking workshops where, you know, you can come in almost tight-fisted, like I want to do good paintings. You know, I look up to this artist. I mean, this is speaking from personal experience, you know, where I take a workshop and I really look up to that artist. And there's a part of me that, you know, has a hard time letting go of, I want to paint well, I want to impress, versus I want to come in here and I want to learn everything that I can learn. I'll tell students that, at least from my experience in taking workshops, I often will do really not particularly good work. during the workshop, because if I'm really being a student in that workshop, I'm trying out different things. I might be trying out a different way of arranging a palette, a different way of mixing, painting exercises, whatever. So I'm taking in a lot of new information. And so like when I go off and paint, it's not necessarily a very good painting. I tell students that the most important part of any workshop is the 2 weeks after the workshop's done.
Oh, that's really great advice. I've never heard anybody say that.
Yeah, no, I firmly believe that, because when you're taking a workshop, or when you go to the convention, another example, like, oh my goodness, you're getting bombarded with 1,000 new ideas, and it's so much to take in, and there's so much energy going in all different directions. But my experience of taking workshops is that next couple of weeks, if I can get my paints out and get some painting done, in the quietness of my own practice, those new ideas suddenly take root. Where during the workshop, maybe they didn't. And I know that a certain percentage of my workshop students, they'll finish the workshop and they won't take the paints out again until the next workshop.
Yeah.
And I think, if you really want your money's worth, it's the time after.
Well, it's interesting you say that. We designed the plein air convention so that, you're watching somebody like you on stage and you're learning new things.
Right.
We designed it so we go out painting that particular day.
Yeah, which is
so
great.
you can try those things, because if you try them, you're more likely to remember them or experience them personally. And if I go to a seminar, a Tony Robbins seminar or something, I oftentimes will block out the day after and stay in my hotel room and just read and study my notes, because if I don't, I'll bring the notes home and I'll never look at them again.
Yeah.
And
you'll fully intend to, right? But then, and then
So
life gets in
I
the way.
think that having a discipline like that is really a good idea.
Yeah.
It might actually be interesting to say, have the workshop plus retreat, where you're going to do the workshop with me for 3 days, and then you're going to spend 2 days painting, and I'll do critiques or something else afterwards. You're going to pay extra for that, but because I want to force you to get out there and paint these things.
I like that idea.
Yeah. All right.
I'll give you a cut.
Yeah.
You get 10% for the
20.
finder's fee. Okay, 20.
Well, I think that...
No, that's a great idea.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be worth it. So I want to kind of go back. You told me a story over dinner, and I want to share that. I want you to share this story, how this whole painting thing actually happened. Now, you didn't tell me about the childhood story of being 8 years old, but I want to go back to that. What was the track that you took from that point when you saw that woman drawing those cats to where you are today?
Wow.
I mean, you don't have to give the whole in-depth...
Blow by blow. All right, the next 3 hours we're going to be...
Yeah, that's right.
It's funny. I love talking to other artists and finding out what their journeys are and how they got to where they got to, because sometimes you feel like, I wasn't on the right track, but somehow I got there. But I think everybody's on the right track. It's just what they need and what they get is a little different.
You're usually where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, hope so.
Whether you know it or not.
So going back to the little 8-year-old, I just, I started to draw a lot on the side. Managed to get a few art lessons as a kid. I think we traded piano lessons. My mom was a piano teacher for art lessons with the local artist, but that was just for a couple of months. And then, just did art in school. And then I went to the Art Institute in Chicago. And at that point, I had never met a working artist, like a full-time professional artist. And so when I said, in high school, I said, I'm going to go to art school. I'm going to be an artist. I got a lot of pushback because, I was like, well, what are you going to do with that?
From whom?
Just from people in the community. Not as much from my parents. Love my mother, but a little bit from my mom. I think she's, worried about, the practicality of being.
Wanted
an
you to be
artist.
able to make a living.
Exactly, yeah. And now that I have kids that are at that age, I understand. But it's just, I just had a dogged determination that this is me, and this is who I am, and this is what I need to do. So I went to the Art Institute Chicago. I was doing more abstract, semi-abstract work. And I liked the instructors there, but I felt very, very lonely. Classes were once a week, and I was living.
So you moved to Chicago?
Yeah.
Or you lived in Chicago?
Yeah. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, so I moved into the city, but I was way on the north side, so a lot of commute time. Wasn't living in a dorm experience or anything like that. So I enjoyed the school, but it didn't feel connected. And then I got a chance to go on an exchange program to an art school in Scotland called Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art. It's a mouthful. Still don't really quite know what a Duncan is or a Jordanstone, but and it was a very different setup. The fine art, drawing, and painting department was, I think, somewhere in the range of 30 people. And it moved you towards having a studio space. Your last years was a little bit more like a graduate school setup where you're working towards a degree show, and your entire degree is ranked on your final show. Mm-hmm. There's no like accumulating credits and that kind of thing. So I ended up there for 2 years. At the start of my fourth year, when I'm supposed to be really developing, fully realized frameable paintings for my final show, in the first weeks of, like within the first couple of days of coming back from my fourth year, final year, some friends invited me to go sketching out at St. Andrews. So St. Andrews is an old medieval town on the coast, and there's the world's first golf course, this beautiful beach along there. And I took a big board and some charcoal, that's all I had, and I did a charcoal drawing of the profile of the cliffs and stuff of St. Andrews and these old buildings. And I felt just the most pure joy I felt doing anything. I've been doing art for years, but being 19, 20, I was trying to be clever and be a edgy art student. Yeah. And I just did this humble landscape, and I thought, it was like meeting myself for the first time. Like, this is me. And so for my last year, I would just take the bus or the train out of town. I think people thought I was crazy. I'd be on the bus and I'd be looking out the window, and I'd see something that looked vaguely decent to paint, and I'd yell at the bus driver to stop, and the bus driver would pull over, and I'd get off and wander out into some field. And it started off doing charcoal drawings, and then I would just add a little bit of color, first with Conte, and then a few pastels. And then I had a really serendipitous experience. I went home for a Christmas break, home being Illinois. I came back home, and I was in the basement looking for something, and I found this old box of pastels, Grumbacher pastels. My mother had taken one art class in her whole life when she was pregnant with me. A friend of hers had gifted her this set of Grumbacher pastels. And I saw them, and I said, "Mom, can I have these?" And she said, "Yeah, I haven't touched them since she was pregnant with me." So I brought those back with me, and that was the push I needed to transition from doing charcoal drawings with a little bit of color to doing full pastel, more like pastel paintings. So for my degree show, the funny thing is I got a fairly low degree mark. They weren't terribly impressed. They were humble, small plein air pastels. I didn't know, I didn't know what I was doing.
But most students, you were telling me, most students would do one major piece as their grad project, right?
No, they would do
a full show.
But larger paintings.
Okay.
Some of it, and it was a gamut.
And yours were all these plein air sketches.
Smaller, plein air, maybe up to 18 by 24. Uh-huh. But I sold out almost the entire show. Sold almost every painting, which was great because I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I was going back to the States. So then I had, during that college time, I had met a gorgeous, wonderful woman who I've been married to now for going on 27 years. And she was from this place called Montana. When I first met her, I don't think I could have found Montana on a map. I didn't know the difference between a deer and an elk. I didn't really know where Yellowstone was, any of that. But I met her, and she came from one of the most gorgeous areas in the country. So right after art school, we moved out to Montana. I told all my friends I'm going to go to Montana to be an artist, and they said, "You're crazy. This is never going to work." And I think, part of the reason I think I did make it was that I was just willing to, I waited tables for a decade, worked as little as possible so that I could devote my time to art. We lived well under the poverty line. My wife is incredible. There's times I think that if she'd said, "I can't take the stress of this, you need to go find a real job," I would have said, "Okay, I'll pack it in and I'll go swing a hammer or something." Mm-hmm. But, at those times, at those low points, she's always been, give me a nudge, say, "No, keep going, keep going. You've got something to say." And so eventually, I think I quit a job and I intended to get another one, and I didn't. And somehow I found myself as a full-time artist. Hi, I'm Aaron Schuerr, and welcome to my workshop. In this workshop, we will be exploring the winter landscape. I'm going to take you to a favorite little spot up in the mountains in Montana in January. We're going to be looking at the end of the day when the sunlight is streaming through the trees, the snow is going into shadow, and there's a dark creek coming out of the pines. And we're going to explore with that the relationship of cool, shadowy forms in the snow, and then the warm light streaming through the trees. So we're going to have that contrast of warm and cool, of light and shadow through a winter landscape. I'm drawing from references that I painted on location on cold days in January, so that I can bring not just the reality of the place, but the experience of the place. Because ultimately, art is about sharing our experiences and our stories. I mass in the big shapes. I work from dark to light. I layer up the color so that you get a luminescence that makes the painting interesting and dynamic. Here I'm going to show you how to link dark shapes, how to look at the big forms, look at the average colors of whole forms, and to start from very, very simple shapes that are interesting and move toward a resolved detail. Wherever you are in your journey as an artist, whether you are new to the medium or you are a seasoned veteran, pro, we are all on the same road. And I'm just sharing my experience. The best part about this is you don't have to suit up in your big snowsuit and mittens. You can stay in the warmth of your studio or in your living room, and I will take you on the trip. And on this trip, you will learn how to see the winter landscape with fresh eyes.